Apparently, you say tomato, but I, in my self-deprecating and quaint British way, I say tomato. But don't call the whole thing off. I'm here not to tell you about the sound of tomatoes, but the effects that sound can have on tomatoes. In order to reproduce, flowering plants use pollen, right, which contains male sex cells. They generally need to get that pollen to the female parts of another flower. Some flowers, like these alder tree catkins on the left, throw their pollen to the wind. Some of them commandeer insects or animals to act as go-betweens. Tomatoes depend on bees, not just any kind of bees, not honeybees, but bumblebees. But just brushing up against the flower isn't good enough. The bumblebees buzz along and clamp themselves onto the flower. They raise their wing beats above the usual humdrum wing beat of flight up to something like a middle C, about 260 hertz. And the pollen, which is stored in tubes, when the buzz frequency is just right, the pollen releases itself onto the bee. Off the bee flies to another flower, job done. Now this process has the snappy name of buzz pollination, and I guess you might have heard of it. Tomato growers often have captive colonies of bumblebees for this purpose. But there's more. Here's an illustration from my most recent book. I was busy researching the culture, the folklore, the history. You wouldn't believe what people have got up to with tomatoes. But I was especially researching recent scientific papers. And just look what I found. Just read that for a moment, or the headline at least. Yep, it turns out that playing loud sound, in this case a high C, about 1 kilohertz to unripe tomatoes, can delay ripening for nearly a week. Now, this isn't some crackpot publication. This is the Annals of Botany, a highly respected, peer-reviewed journal. And these researchers are well respected too. Here's their result. Our results indicate that the sound vibration helps to delay fruit ripening through the sophisticated regulation of coding and non-coding RNAs and transcription factor genes. I can see the motive here for this research. Controlling ripening timing is obviously an advantage to growers. It's normally done with plant hormones such as ethylene, but farmers could well find other methods useful. Frankly, I don't know whether to be more amazed at the result or the fact that these researchers decided to hook up a signal generator and amplifier and blast a bunch of tomatoes in the first place. And here's a final surprising thought. Flowers, of course, produce nectar as a reward for pollinators, and there's evidence that different species have evolved with different cocktails of sugars and amino acids to suit their principal pollinators. So plants that are principally pollinated by hummingbirds have a different nectar cocktail from bee-pollinated or butterfly-pollinated plants. But in 2019, researchers, this time from Tel Aviv University, published their experiments with Enothera, the beach evening primrose. Yet again, more loudspeakers, signal generators, and recordings of different pollinators played to the plants. And it turns out that within 3 minutes of a sound being played, the flowers had responded with a nectar mix tuned to the needs of the particular pollinator. The paper reports this by saying both the vibration and the nectar response were frequency specific, they say. Flowers vibrated mechanically in response to these sounds, suggesting a plausible mechanism where the flower serves as an auditory sensory organ. And there were some very elegant experiments that they did to show this. And I love this final line of their abstract. Our results suggest that plants may be affected by other sounds as well, including anthropogenic ones. So consider our Prince Charles. In the 1980s, he was widely mocked and derided for reportedly, at least, chatting to plants. But you know, maybe he was actually onto something. Thank you for listening. Please keep in touch. Enjoy the books if you like.